Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.
The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, Dave and I are thrilled to welcome Eric Garcia. Eric, we're so looking forward to chatting with you.
I'm really happy to be here. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, that's for sure. Yeah. And not only that, but the timeliness of what we'll discuss is just spot on. So a little bit about Eric. Eric is the senior Washington correspondent at The Independent and a columnist for MSNBC. He is the author of the must-read book, We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation. And he has written for The Washington Post, The National Journal, The New Republic, The Daily Beast, The American Prospect, and elsewhere. And he lives in Washington, D.C. So, Eric, if you don't mind, what I'd like to do is begin with a quote from We're Not Broken. And it's kind of a dedication of your book. And Eric said this book is a message from autistic people to their parents, friends, teachers, co-workers, and doctors, showing what life is like on the spectrum. It also is my love letter to autistic people. For too long, we have been forced to navigate a world where all the road signs are written in another language. What made you want to give that dedication at the beginning of your book?
Yeah, it's funny. I that was like one of those ones that I was just trying to figure out the way to. One of the things I'm sure that you know about writing a book is that you write the introduction at the end. Typically, I made the mistake of writing at the beginning, and I think what I was trying to do is I was trying to at the time when I was writing that, I was trying to not only inform people what the book was going to be, what they were about to open up, but also what I wanted. So it was also kind of like my North Star for that. It was kind of my true north about like, okay, what do I want to do? Because like, I mean, if you look at the book, it's relatively short. And the way that I wanted it to be is because I live in Washington D.C. as you said, but my family lives in California. I wanted it to be something that people could read on the plane. Mm-hmm. Like on a coast-to-coast plane ride and feel like they learned something. And I think that the reason why I wanted to do that is I think that a lot of people tend to think that focusing on neurodiversity, focusing on autism acceptance automatically pits you against parents, educators, clinicians, all those things. Like I think that there's this, there's talk about the autism wars and, parents versus self-advocates. And I was like, no, like, I mean, what I think we need, and my belief is that we need everybody and what we need, and different people can contribute to different things. But what I wanted them to do, is like at the core of it, understand what autistic people are going through, and have that navigate what, like dictate what they were going to push for, what they wanted to. And then for the second part of it, I think what I wanted to do is I just wanted to. It's really funny writing about. I didn't start my journalism career wanted to write about autism. It was always something that was not because I was ashamed of it. It was just like it was nobody's business. Yep. I got my start writing about politics and economics. I still write about politics and economics, and there's a lot of news on both of those fronts. But like what I wanted more than anything was I just wanted but what was funny was the more I wrote about autism and the more I interviewed autistic people, the more that I found myself not hating these parts of myself that I thought I hated. Like it's funny because like I'm a child of the 1990s. So I got diagnosed around the time when autism was. I got diagnosed around 1998. I'm 34. So like when the science was changing, and Barry, you were on the ground seeing how the understanding of the science was changing.
Yes.
And Dave, you got diagnosed later. And like I think and one thing I've always, but you don't know anything about that when you're on the schoolyard, when you're 8 or 9 or whatever. And so
you don't want to be different.
Yeah, and so you just feel like a lot of these things about you are failures. And so the more I interviewed autistic people, the more I just was able to shed those ideas about myself. And so this was, so when I say this is a love letter, it was because like I was realizing that all these things that I thought were bad about myself were actually just me being autistic. And I think that was why I wanted to center around love. And I wanted it was really kind of a way for me to say thank you, because I learned as much about myself and learned to hate a lot less about myself of being autistic by doing this. I still hate myself a little bit, but not because of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, but there's a long list for anyone to hate themselves. We don't need to pick on one thing or another.
Yeah.
The interesting thing here too is that I totally resonate with what, I'm right there with you. I hear what you're saying, and I can relate to it because there is. When I'm alone, I'm totally normal.
Yes.
It seems the more people are around me, the more quote unquote autistic I get, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, and I read about this that like the simultaneously, I've never felt simultaneously more autistic and more non-autistic than when I was at a autism gathering in Michigan that I read about in the book. It was like out of the woods, just like an hour out of Detroit. And it was an all autism gathering. I think there was only one non-autistic person there. Who was there with her kid, but like it was the most, but like it was simultaneously one of the most. I was the most at ease there, and and I was just like, wow, I really am fucking autistic. You know, so that was kind of the funny thing is that like the more that I started to hang out with other autistic people, the more I realized like, oh, I'm not a bad person. I'm not lazy. I'm not too much. I'm not too loud. It's just like I'm autistic,
Yep.
Yeah, and that's such an incredible insight because it really speaks to the importance of autistic people finding their tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It is incredibly important. And look, like I have a lot of neurotypical friends. Though some of them have realized that they're neurodivergent because guess what? When you're hanging out with me, there's reasons we vibe. But like a lot of my friends are neurotypical. A lot of my coworkers are neurotypical. And I love them. I love hanging out with them. But like, there's also just things that like, there's just so much. There's really nothing like being around your kind,
Sure. Yeah.
And nothing like being around people who understand you and who are going to give you grace and empathy,
Yes. Yeah. So let's shift a little bit now to your career, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think Dave and I are especially interested in looking through the eyes of an autistic person and yet being a journalist in this crazy time of what's going on in this country.
Yeah.
Uh, do you feel that your approach to journalism is different, that you are autistic and different from neurotypical journalists? I'm sure it depends upon the subject you're covering, but I was
Yeah,
curious
no,
about that.
totally. So like, I mean, I'll admit that like I'm not good because like, look, I spend most of my days covering Capitol Hill. I'm not, I'll admit, like, I'm not that good with like grabbing a lawmaker and like talking to them on background or like, building sources. But like, I think one of the things that I'm really good at is like being, for better or worse, kind of being kind of a jerk and asking the most inappropriate question, like getting the question that generates headlines
Yes.
and also or trends on social media or things like that. And I think the other thing is that like I'm really adamant about learning a policy inside and out. Like, so like when I was one of my early jobs, I was at Roll Call. I was a publication called Roll Call, which is really the community newspaper. Some of your listeners in Washington D.C. might know this, but it's like it's basically like the community newspaper at Capitol Hill. And as a result, you have to read a lot of legislative text. You have to read a lot of law. You have to basically like decode it. And I think that was like one of those things that I was just able to just go through, uh, you know, bill text and kind of just read it. Or I'm really obsessed with looking at voting records, like how
Hmm.
members of Congress vote, or or how they, why they voted this way, or like, and then the other thing that I'm just obsessed with is I'm obsessed with going through campaign finance stuff. So, and campaign finance forms, these are all public information.
Hmm.
So I think that's what I'm really good at. And I think I'm getting better at talking to people on background. Not as great. I'm really good at, obviously right now, with with what Elon Musk is doing with, and we can talk about Elon Musk later,
Yes.
'cause I have a lot of thoughts about Elon Musk. But what Elon Musk is doing with the federal bureaucracy, like I've gotten better, particularly when it comes to HHS and NIH and the National Science Foundation. I've been able to get some people to talk with me on background or talk with me on Signal, or talk with me on, confidentially in a way, or that allows me to tip them off. But like, it's just really the fact I think that like I'm willing to kind of be a little pushy, and I don't
Hmm.
necessarily care about social niceties. Sometimes it gets me in trouble, like the time when I tried catching a lawmaker in the men's room, but other times, that was, I almost lost my credential because of that.
Oh my
My,
goodness.
my capital credential because of that. But other times it also means that like, I'm just willing to like, but also it just means that like, sometimes I'm just not willing to take no for an answer. So like
Hmm.
when I was in for the longest time, the Trump campaign just iced us out last year.
Hmm.
Not because of anything that we were doing, but because like, and I learned later, there's because they just saw us as foreign press, so they were a little bit more skeptical. But like it was kind of one of those things where it was like I just didn't want to take no for an answer. So even though they gave us like a blanket no, I was texting people on the Trump campaign just saying like, no, we're gonna get that. Like, can I just get this one credential? And we did it on a case by case basis. But like,
Yeah.
it was just one of those things that like we just kind of had to. I think the fact that I'm autistic and like I don't care about the kind of social process together. I'm just like, no, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
We're gonna go. We're going to Chicago. We're going to Milwaukee. That was what the convention was. We're going to Greensboro. We're going to Florida for whatever.
Hmm. You know that
Yeah.
that that
Go
that
ahead.
reminds me of the quote from Greta Thunberg, the climate activist, where she
Yeah.
says, being autistic allows her to cut through the bullshit and keep asking the tough questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I read about Greta in the book, and I read about and like I remember I saw Greta when she came to a climate protest in Washington back in 2019. That's the close. That's the close of the afterword of the paperback edition.
So,
The parallel here is it's the same thing like when the job of the journalist is to cut through, to make sense, and then to present it to the rest of us like, oh, that
Yeah.
person did ask the tough question. So it's almost like you are hyper qualified to participate in that, because the easiest thing for any policymaker, any legislator, any public figure to do is to just say, I'm not going to participate in that. You're not
Yeah.
invited. So to be able to cut through that, I think is a really important service, and an important quality that you have that it enables that service.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll say something because like what happened is like to your point, there's this one. So I'm not going to put him on blast. There's this one lawmaker who refuses to do hallway interviews in the Capitol. And she always says, I don't do hallway interviews. I don't do hallway interviews. So the other day, I shouldn't have done this, but I did anyway. I was a dick, and I was just like, I ran by her, and I was just like, sorry, I don't do hallway interviews. And they complained, they complained to the gallery about it. Um, but it's like, look, if you're not going to take hallway interviews, then yeah, I'm going to kind of a dick to you about it. So.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, I think an appropriate response is, I pay your salary, lady.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I pay your salary. Yeah.
All right.
And I don't even get a vote in Congress. I live in Washington, D.C. You know?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, so why don't we shift to the three big issues, I think, that what is currently going on politically and with the new administration that are so relevant, to people with disabilities, people on the autism spectrum, and general society in some ways.
Sure.
Why don't we talk a little bit about DOE, Department of Education, and what's going on right now?
Oh man, yeah, no, we picked the perfect week to do this, didn't we? Yeah, so I mean, I think what was really interesting to me about it is, so like, I think what we should preface by saying that the Trump administration or any presidential administration cannot eliminate a whole department without unilaterally through executive order. It requires a statute to eliminate it. So first off, this is going to be challenging the courts.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
This is just statutorily, it doesn't have standing. And it's probably going to get challenged. Second of all, I think what's important to recognize is that this has been a goal of the conservative movement going back to the creation of the Department of Education, which was in 1977, I believe, when the Carter administration did it. Ronald Reagan talked about eliminating the Department of Education in his second State of the Union in 1982. Rick Perry, if you remember, there was that famous where he said, like, I want to get through to three departments, and he couldn't remember the third one.
Right.
He said he wanted to get rid of the Department of Education. So this has been a long-standing policy. And I think the point that I've made for the longest time is that Trump is doing this this executive order largely because it's a recognition that they can't get it through Congress because it's too politically unpopular to get rid of the Department of Education. Prior to the Individual Disabilities Education Act being passed, something like I have right here. So according to the Education Department, there are about 50 million students in 98,000 public schools. It helps with grant loans, work-study programs. But the most important stat I want to point out is in 1970, only 1 in 5 students with disabilities went to a public school. Nearly 1.8 million children were excluded from public schools in 1970. Now, about 15% of students in public schools receive special education services.
Mm-hmm.
That is a revolutionary thing. That means that more students are able to go to school. That means that their rights are protected under the Individual Disabilities Education Act. There is they have IEPs, they have 504s. This was nothing short of revolutionary. There, a ton of people who, even with the scraps, were able to make wondrous achievements. IDEA has not been reauthorized by Congress since 2004. It's just too politically toxic to do because there's just too many Republicans who oppose the Department of Education as a whole and don't want to give the federal government more. And then a lot of Democrats wish that there would be more funding. So it just hasn't been reauthorized. Even though there are plenty of things that need modernization for it, especially there are more students going to college. I would love to see there should be an IDEA reauthorization with higher education in mind.
And transition planning, yes.
Transition planning. This is something that for all the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk stuff, there actually is an office that audits how much money is going on. It's called the Government Accountability Office.
Mm-hmm.
And there are multiple studies that the GAO has done that shows that we're not doing a good job of transitioning students with disabilities. So take that into account. The other thing is that the federal government was supposed to shoulder about 40% of the cost for IDEA. It's only shouldered upward of about the highest I think it has been was about 17%, and it was right after COVID.
Yep.
When states just needed an influx of cash. So You'd be surprised when I would go to Trump rallies or when I would go to the RNC or when I would go to CPAC, how many parents of students with disabilities I would see
Mhm.
there. And but I remember one time I was at the RNC and someone stopped me. They're like, Eric Garcia, I read your book. I was in Milwaukee and I was like, and you spoke to my students, and I was just like, oh, and people might say, oh, like, how could I have fans here? Because, people would think that but like a lot of parents feel that the Department of Education has failed them. So this is a very long answer to say that, like, yeah, it is going to put students at a major disadvantage.
Yeah, and one thing that I don't understand is, again, Department of Government Efficiency. I've spent a lot of time over many years going into schools, public schools and private schools, but mostly public schools. And, you know, where's the waste? I mean, if anything, providing the right supports for kids with disabilities in the schools is underfunded.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I don't understand that argument if this is supposed to be a cost saving measure. And not only that, but we have all the data about the successes when kids are appropriately supported from early intervention on.
Yeah.
So, the long term impacts are, we know people with disabilities, kids with disabilities are at such high risk for being incarcerated when they get older if they don't have the right supports and their families don't have the right supports.
Yeah, they're at higher risk of being disconnected. So, which is to say that after graduating high school, they're less likely to have either a job or be in some kind of training. When they turn 21, which is the cutoff for IDEA, they fall off the cliff because there's just not a lot of resources when it comes to SSI or when it comes to Medicaid. And we could talk about Medicaid later because that's something that is on the chopping block.
Yes, yeah.
The largest amount of waste within schools is not with educators, it's with administrators, it's administrative staff. Like, again, this is not to defend the status quo. There are things that are duplicative, that there are things that could absolutely be one of the big issues is that as you know, Barry, the problem with a lot of these services is that IEPs are done from a deficit-based standpoint
Yes.
and not a strength-based standpoint. So, like, I'm all for fixing these things. I'm all for making these things more efficient, making it so that, I'm all for if there are things that are duplicative or that are not focused on helping people graduate or get a job or anything, these things, I'm all for it. But it's just like these things need a scalpel. They don't need a meat axe. They don't
Right.
need the chains. They don't need Elon Musk with a chainsaw.
That's a really good metaphor, the scalpel versus the axe. And I guess why I don't follow anything politics because, I mean, I can't avoid it because I go to scroll for dog videos on Instagram and I see all the headlines. But for my mental health, my just sanity, I don't really access news. Sorry, I'm admitting this to a journalist. But the point I'm trying to get at here is like why I love the scalpel. Why has the scalpel not worked? Is it because there's so much just left side, right side, lack of cooperation over the last 20 years? Is it because we've had the wrong leadership in these
I think
decision-making roles?
it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, I think that it's important to recognize, like I said, for the last 20 years. So, like, Republicans want to get rid of the Department of Education. This has been a priority of theirs for 40, 50 years now. And as a result, Democrats, I think that what the mistake that Democrats make is that when Republicans talk about this and talk about eliminating it, rather than defending rather than providing an alternative, or rather than making these things more efficient, or rather than proposing policies that would make these programs work better, they wind up defending the status quo. And I think if Democrats are to have any kind of hope at defending these things, look, if eventually, look, Trump is eventually not going to be president, and eventually there will be a Democratic president in the future. I think what Democrats and those who care about education would need to do is that they would need to present a positive version and a positive vision, not just defending the status quo or not going back to the old days, but actually presenting a positive vision of specifically for why federal protections need to exist in the federal for education.
So, Eric, why don't we shift a little bit about, you brought up Medicaid a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And if we could talk specifically about, the potential impact on autistic people and people with disabilities.
When it comes to people with disabilities, as you know, Barry and David, I think you know, is that like there's Medicaid, the way that students that participants in patients on Medicaid are able to stay in their homes is this thing called the Medicaid Home and Community-Based Services Waiver.
Mm-hmm.
And it was initially put in place by Ronald Reagan with the Katie Beckett waiver. I'm sure, Barry, you remember that whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. Reagan gave this whole address about like how Katie Beckett, it was actually more expensive for Medicaid to pay for her to be in an institution versus her getting care in the home. And it was actually quite a revolutionary thing. And Reagan was right. It is cheaper to people receive care. And the wait list the last time I checked was around something like 700,000, and for all people with disabilities. Medicaid, because of that, a lot of people are on wait lists, and as a result, they're now unable to. And as a result, what it means is that it's never been Medicaid Home and Community Services has never been fully funded. And as a result, a lot of people just are on wait lists or they have limited services, they have limited care. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're on limited services, they're on limited care, the services they receive are inadequate. So the point being is that now with Medicaid is because the fact and a lot of autistic people rely on Medicaid HCBS to stay in their homes and get around the clock care and stay in their homes. There is evidence that this improves life outcomes. So all this is to say that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Medicaid Home and Community Service was a revolutionary program.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed people to stay in their homes in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have. And it also, but the fact of the matter is that because it's not considered an entitlement, it'll probably be one of the first things on the chopping block because it's done through a waiver rather than it being codified, rather than it being like, yeah.
What is something that is considered an entitlement, and how does something receive that status?
Yeah, so an entitlement is basically, it's something like Social Security, something like Medicare or Medicaid the conditional way, and that's just like the way that we think of entitlements is we think of it as like you paid into the system, therefore you are entitled to it.
Okay.
You are because Medicaid, because a lot of these people are children, and things like that. They didn't pay into the system. Now their parents paid into the system, and then entitlements means that it's often through a separate revenue stream. So, for example, Medicare, Social Security is not paid through by income taxes; it's paid through by the payroll tax. It's a different revenue stream. And that basically what it means is that they're legally obligated to have those benefits.
I think that in general public and society thinks of the word entitlement like, oh, you're getting a freebie. This is a handout to you. And it's totally wrong based upon your very clear definition.
Right, exactly, because it's like it's like the reason why Social Security is such a third rail in politics and why Republicans, their hair is probably on fire with this news that Elon Musk's Doge is trying to touch Social Security right now. Is that because it's like people feel about Social Security and Medicare, they feel very differently about it than they do about SNAP or WIC, because they're just feeling that like, well, those are for people who didn't pay, they don't want to work, which is not true. Majority of people who go on welfare actually do have work, or they've experienced some kind of work. They just on hard times. But with Social Security, it's like, wait, I paid into this. I spent X amount of years. Every time you look at your paycheck and you see that amount of money that's taken from your payroll tax, So Medicare and Medicaid, not only are they legally obligated, but they're also almost kind of politically obligated. Because like if you touch them, then people are like, wait, we spent all these years paying into Social Security and Medicare.
So a couple of other third rails here.
We're touching all the third rails.
Right. One is RFK. And, I shared during my presentations, and I have a section of some presentations I've been doing for a number of years. under the theme of autism is not a tragedy. And I use Kennedy's quote from 2015, which Steve uses, and this is 2015 from Kennedy. Autism destroys the lives of millions of children and shatters their families. And this is going out from his bully pulpit to the public. And so not only are we talking about all the controversies around vaccines, but we're also talking about trying to almost, the term that I use is repathologize autism when we've been working on depathologizing it. Your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I just, to your point, Barry, and the Department of Health and Human Services, which Kennedy is now the secretary of, they just announced that they are cutting a $93 million grant for ALIVE, the development and feasibility of psychosocial intervention for sexual and gender minority autistic adults. That's one of the ones that just got hit by the Doge chainsaw. There was also going to be another one for $2.4 million for biomarkers for late diagnosis in females and gender diverse autistic people. Those ones just got hit by the Doge chainsaw. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to talk about, the point that I want to make is that Kennedy doing this, your point about Kennedy's, is that you're right, he's repathologizing it. The whole anxiety about the anti-vaccine movement Kennedy would not have a foothold in American politics. Well, he probably would still have a foothold because he's a Kennedy,
right.
Which is, ironic because his Uncle Ted wrote the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right. Yeah.
And his dad was one of the people who exposed the abuses at Willowbrook in New York in the 1960s. I'm sure you remember that, Barry. Like Geraldo Rivera did it, So
I was there at Geraldo's one-to-one festival in Central Park, which was a festival about introducing people in the general public to people with disabilities and get to know them, and let's get away from this dungeon of places like Willowbrook.
Yeah, exactly. That was and ironically now RFK Jr. wants to send people on to wellness farms, I'm sure, as you've seen him talk about. But he's directly betraying his father's legacy. Mm-hmm. This whole thing that his father did was trying to expose the horrors at Willowbrook, which is why his dad is one of my heroes. Mm-hmm. But the point that I'm making is that RFK would not have a foothold. He would not have gained credibility had there not already been decades of fear about autism. And to your point, he says that it destroys people's lives, it ruins people's lives. RFK Jr. would not have the foothold if it weren't for people just being afraid of autism. Mm-hmm. And thinking that their lives were going to be over and seeing that autism was a tragedy or something that breaks up families or anything like that. Kennedy gained credibility because we already had this fear about autism. And he really started to talk about this really in the 2000s when, guess what? We saw an increase in diagnosis with autism. And it was because we got better improved science and because of the things like the IDEA, which the federal government schools now had to report to the federal government how many students they were serving. So naturally, you just saw more students being reported as being on the autism spectrum because a lot of students get their services through that way. But what happened was it had this kind of deleterious effect, which was that you saw an increase in diagnosis with autism, so people thought it was an epidemic, and that was how people like Kennedy were able to get a foothold.
Right.
And so to have someone like RFK Jr., someone who has such a misunderstanding of the science, a willful misunderstanding of the science, I should say, because at this point it's been thoroughly debunked, is deeply concerning. It's not just concerning but it's particularly concerning, I should say, for autistic people because now he's going to have wide levity to determine what kind of stuff is going to be, what kind of research for autism is going to be discussed.
Absolutely. Getting back to the old, it's a deficit. It's tragic. Let's get rid of it. And let's pour all this money into getting rid of it. Maybe he should read something like this. Maybe he should read Uniquely Human. Elon Musk. Yeah, I mean, one thing, let me just put this on the table. I'm not making any judgments about this, but I'm fascinated about how rarely autism comes up in the conversation about Elon Musk. And of course, the great danger of, if it does come up more, then people will see some of the things that he's doing, especially people who hate the things that he's doing. They're going to attribute it to autism, but it very rarely comes up.
No. This is a really good thing. This is really funny. It's really funny you mentioned that because literally it was funny. Like a Democratic pollster just sent this memo to reporters earlier this week, and it was interesting because it was the words people voters are least likely to associate with Elon Musk, quote unquote, very well are sexy, the real president, drug addict, honest, and autistic, and trustworthy and dumb and unintelligent. Like so, and what's funny is that like last month I was at the Conservative Political Action Conference where Elon Musk spoke, and what's funny about Elon is like the point I was making is that like simultaneously I was like, man, that because like I've watched a lot of Elon Musk's speeches and things like that. As one is like I think that his brain has become mush in recent years, just like
Yeah.
but B, what's funny is that like I'm just like, dude, you are so fucking autistic. It was funny, like being like I was in the back of the room, I was in the bullpen, but I was just like, it's funny. There's this tweet somebody points out that like when one autistic person sees another person slightly more autistic than them, their kill switch turns on. and and it was almost kind of like that with me. But like, and I'm not. And so the point that I want to make about Elon Musk is that is like I don't think. I mean, his autism is in no way excuse for him doing a lot of things that he does. His promoting
Right.
of his racism, the whole like when people said that like it was him stimming when he gave that Nazi salute.
Right.
I've never met a different individual with autism, a different autistic individual whose stim was Nazi salutes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, come on, man, Elon, don't you have a stim toy? Dude, like, don't you have something to fidget with? Don't you have a fidget? Somebody get Elon a fidget toy.
A fidget.
Somebody get this man a fidget spinner.
And not a chainsaw.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like that was my reaction. What was funny is when that whole thing happened, it was on inauguration day, and I didn't we didn't get because we're a foreign press, we didn't get proper credentials to be in the actual room. So I was sitting with a few of my friends write for a Jewish newspaper, and I was sitting with them, and then we were watching the Elon speaking at the Capital One Arena and did that. And then like they were working on something else, and I was just like, I said to my reporter, my friends who were Jewish and another book, I was like, wait, guys, like I felt like, and I was just like, look, I'm not. The point I was making is I was like, I'm not Jewish, so like, but I need like, guys, did he just do what I did? I was like, I'm not losing my mind, am I? But like that, so the point that I'm making about that, like we could joke all we want about it, but
Yeah.
the point that I made about Elon is that like it's so funny when I see him because like it is so apparent that the guy is autistic, and I knew it, but like at the same time, like thankfully what I've seen is that we haven't seen people associate the traits that people don't like about him with his autism. That's
Right.
actually like really good. And like I've said that like Elon Musk has done us all a favor that showed that we're not all perpetual angels and we're not all
That's right.
sweet perpetual children. Some of us are jerks, but like and what's funny about it is that if you look at the polling right now, that like even as Trump's approval ratings are still pretty high, most people don't like Elon Musk, including a lot of
Right.
Republicans don't like Elon Musk. When he was on the Hill a few weeks ago, like he had to take questions from a lot of Republican lawmakers, like, "What are you doing?" Your cutting programs are important to me, to my constituents. But like, I think the point that I want to make about Elon Musk is that um, like in a weird way, it's almost as if he's such a tryhard and he's trying hard to fit in with these guys, like with the dark gothic MAGA and
Right.
the gold chains and the sunglasses and the blazers and things like that. And it's just like you can tell it's weirdly enough, like in a weird way, it almost comes off as masking.
I was just going to say that. Yes,
Like in a
absolutely.
weird, twisted way, it's a kind of masking
Yeah.
that he's trying hard to fit in with, the MAGA bros. But I'm just like, yeah, that's just not his speed because he's not from MAGA land. Dude, you're from South Africa and you're from Silicon Valley. Like
Yes.
even like I know he lives in Austin now, but like people think, oh, you live in Austin, you live in Texas. Like Austin is basically Silicon Valley in Texas.
It
Like
is.
this isn't the crowd he's used to. You know, so I just find it so funny that it's so forced. And like I said, it feels like a type of masking to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Bill Burr is my favorite comedian
Yeah,
at
same
the
here.
moment, and he's just got this great line where it's like, "Why are you so unhappy with your hundreds of billions of dollars that you need to like? What do you? Why are you even showing up to work if you have hundreds of billions of dollars?" It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
come on,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. So like, I always feel torn about talking about Elon Musk because of the fact that like I don't want people to associate his autism with his other traits. But like at the same time, I do also feel like kind of obligated to like say this isn't his autism. This is just he's a jerk, you know?
Yeah, I
Or,
had to do the same
and
thing in my. Go ahead.
I was going to say, or could it be that with whatever superpower genius he has, maybe due to his autism, he just applies it with lousy intentions and in lousy ways?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Yeah, no, the other angle that I've said to your point is that like I've felt is that like it doesn't surprise me that he fell down a rabbit hole because it's very easy. We see this with a lot of autistic people who do get into extremist movements like QAnon
Right.
and there were a lot of autistic men who stormed the Capitol on January 6th,
Yeah.
like and they fell down these internet rabbit holes. So like it's very, in the same way, like it's very possible that he kind of went down this path just because like just a tendency to take things to the extreme, which like I can totally see how that could happen. Like I'm not defending his actions, but I can see how it's possible that he fell down that rabbit hole.
So, Eric, we covered a lot.
We covered a lot,
of
man. We have
important
covered
issues. Any things you would like, especially from the viewpoint of an autistic journalist who's up close, seeing what's going on right now, culturally and politically? Any thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that I think that look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat things. I don't believe in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is that I think that there is a marked difference now with how we talk about like, yes, we are seeing anti-vaxxers in the highest echelons of government. Yes, we're seeing people who have just bad ideas about autism in the highest ranks of
Mm-hmm.
government. But I think the difference between now and previous anti-vax movements or previous anti-autism movements is now that there's like a glut of there's a treasure trove of autistic people who are able to speak out, who are able to talk about it. The fact that I'm able to do this, the fact that I'm able to write and report about, just like 2 weeks ago, I wrote a piece about like how Trump's anti-DEI measure like caused a lot of grants that are meant to help autistic students in STEM just completely cut them off. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a wonderful thing that like now we have, and it's not just me anymore. It's people like Sarah Luderman, who's also an autistic journalist. That there's groups like the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network, the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. There's podcasts like this. Like there's so much more that we have now than we did in the past, and I think that's going to be an important. I think it's going to be an important bulwark. And I think that what it's gonna be something that I think that a lot of people are gonna have to up their game on, especially when now some major promoters of misinformation now have the biggest bully pulpit in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And not only bully pulpit, the ability to change policy. So I think it's going to be increasingly important. It's funny because like uh, I joked again. I live in DC. It was like there's that talk about how Elon Musk was going to go to the Pentagon, and I joked. I was like, "Oh, Elon's going to go see a bunch of other autistic people," because like I used to go by Pentagon City, and there's a lot of autistic intelligence officers, man, a lot. Same if he was going to go to the CIA base in Langley. Or in Quantico, I think, yeah. But like I mean, as much as I do think that that's the big difference. But I also do want to, but like, and at the same time, I don't want to give people any false hope. I don't want to give any people like, this is going to be a really trying time, and it's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
time that it's going to take a long time to undo a lot of the stuff that they're doing. So I think that's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's going to take groundswell, like people
It-
level, to undo it.
Yeah, it's gonna take people. It's gonna take not only nerds like me, but it's gonna take people who watch dog videos on Instagram too.
Among which I number.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
I'm
Eric,
fucking with you.
Thank you so much for your insights, for your kind of inside behind the scenes story of what's going on, and especially from the perspective of autism and neurodivergent people. It's so important to put this on the table.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dave Barrett. Thank you very much, Dave.
It's so enlightening. Thank you, Eric. What a blessing to be able to talk to you. Amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right. Take care. All right.
Bye-bye.